Hello everyone, welcome to episode 27 of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a podcast focused on the African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues, produced by Amani Africa Media and Research Services. I am Previn Habu, and today I am joined by my colleague, Fikir Getachew. Hello Fikir.
Hello Previn, how are you?
I'm well. So Equatorial Guinea has taken over the role of chairing the Peace and Security Council for the month of February. The program of work seems lighter, but also brings to the fore some pertinent issues. But before we delve into the details of February's program of work, why don't we briefly reflect back to the PSC's engagement during the previous month and perhaps capture some of the highlights and major changes introduced to the program in the course of the month. Looking back, Cote d'Ivoire presided over the chairship of the PSC in January 2025, and we saw the PSC having several changes to its program. The provisional program of work initially envisaged 7 substantive sessions covering 8 agenda items. However, after 2 revisions, Council held 5 substantive sessions covering 7 agenda items. The first PSC meeting of 2025 was on consideration of the report of the AU Commission on the activities and mandates of the renewal of the Multinational Joint Task Force, MNJTF, which was held on 13th of January. Coming in as its 1254th meeting, the meeting had the participation of His Excellency Ambassador Maman Nuhu, who is the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission and head of the MNJTF mission. And also we saw the attendance of Major General Ibrahim Salau Ali, the MNJTF force commander, who both made briefings on the security situation in the Lake Chad Basin and the MNJTF's efforts in countering Boko Haram and the 2 main splinter groups, Jamatu Ali Sun Lidawati, Wal Jihad, the JAS, and the Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, who continue to pose significant threats to regional peace and security. From the adopted communique, the PSC, among other decisions, tasked the AU Commission and the Lake Chad Basin Commission to renew the Memorandum of Understanding and the Support Implementation Agreement between the AU Lake Chad Basin Commission and MNJTF troop contributing countries, which would guide the provision of AU additional support to the MNJTF for a period of 1 year, effective 1st of February 2025. Moreover, the PSC decided to renew the mandate of the MNJTF for another period of 12 months, effective from the 1st of February 2025. Fikir, what session was a highlight during the month also?
Well, there were a number of engagements at different levels of the PSC following that session you spoke of. Which included the Committee of Experts convening to consider the report on the activities of the Peace and Security Council and the state of peace and security in Africa, and the report on implementing of the AU Master Roadmap on silencing the guns. These, which were later discussed at the ambassadorial level on 30th of January, which was followed by discussions on update on the operationalization of the African Standby Force. The PSC also convened to consider the half-year report of the chairperson of the Commission on Elections in Africa, conducted from July to December 2024, and set outlooks for elections that will take place in the first half of 2025. There was also an open session to commemorate the third Africa Day of Peace and Reconciliation, which was held on 31st January. In addition to these sessions, on 28th January, the Peace and Security Council convened an emergency ministerial session on the conflict in Eastern DRC, which was the session that stood out. The session was convened following a letter sent from the DRC requesting for the PSC to convene an urgent meeting on the deteriorating security situation in Eastern DRC. So by now we know that the M23 opened a new front in South Kivu, capturing several towns including Goma, and as we record this podcast, they're advancing towards Bukavu, the biggest city in Eastern DRC and the capital of South Kivu. Further exacerbating the insecurity tension in DRC and the region, protests had erupted in Kinshasa on 28 January in response to the developments that were happening in Goma. And these protests targeted key installations, including those associated with the international community, most notably embassy premises protected under international law. And since the start of 2025 alone, we saw a surge in violence in the region that has displaced over 500,000 people. The communique the PSC adopted from the emergency session called for, among other decisions, for an immediate and unconditional withdrawal of M23 from Minova, Sake, and Goma and other occupied areas in eastern DRC, and for all other foreign armed and terrorist groups operating in the DRC, in line with the communique of the mini-summit of Luanda, which was held in November 23, 2022. The PSC further urged the signatories of the August 2024 ceasefire agreement and the harmonized plan for neutralization of FDLR and their disengagement of November 2024, which was adopted under the auspices of the Luanda process, to implement the aforementioned agreements and to urgently and unconditionally return to dialogue. The PSC also called for the two parties to return immediately to the Luanda process and under the facilitation of His Excellency President Lorenzo, the President of the Republic of Angola and the Chair of the ICGLR and the AU Champion for Peace and Reconciliation, and also resume the Nairobi peace processes, reiterating that there can be no military solution to the current situation in the Eastern DRC. Notably also, the Council called for a heads of state and government level PSC session that will take place on the margins of the 38th AU Summit, which will be taking place in Addis on the 15th and 16th of February.
Looking ahead, 3 substantive sessions covering 5 agenda items are planned to be considered by the Council. The PSC in February will be meeting at all the 3 levels, with sessions planned at the ambassadorial, ministerial, and heads of states and governments level. First up, on 4th February, the PSC was scheduled to convene for a ministerial level session on maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. However, as of the recording of this podcast, we saw the meeting not happening as planned. Then on 14th of February, the PSC is having a session at the heads of states and government level with 2 agenda items: to consider the situation in Sudan and to consider the situation in Eastern DRC. The PSC last addressed the situation in Sudan on October 2024 after their field mission to Port Sudan and Cairo. If you could remind us what has changed since then.
Since then, it has been escalation on all fronts. The ASF took Wad Medin in January 2025 and is regaining control over Al Ghazira state and actively advancing into Khartoum, while North Darfur and Al Fashar are still burning. Civilians are trapped in what the AU Genocide Prevention Envoy Adama Dieng calls, and I quote, a blackout of atrocities. This includes mass killing, sexual violence, and the famine engulfing 24.6 million people. Meanwhile, mediation efforts are scattered, with Turkey now joining the fray.
Thank you for that, Fikr. The summit level session will also consider the situation in Eastern DRC as another agenda item. As I mentioned earlier, Council called for a heads of states and government level PSC session on the situation in the country during the margins of the 38th AU Summit. Then, closing the month on 20th February, it's a virtual ambassadorial level session on fight against the use of child soldiers, which is scheduled to take place on 20th February. The Council's last session on the matter was during its 1202 meeting, which was held in 27th February 2024. And during that session, it expressed deep concern over the increasingly asymmetrical nature of armed conflicts in Africa that heightened the vulnerability of children to grave rights violations. In this case, their recruitment and use by armed forces, non-state armed groups, and terrorist organizations. In this session, it is expected that the PSC will follow up on the decisions it had passed to develop a best practice document of reference to prevent and end the recruitment and use of child soldiers by armed groups and operationalize child protection architecture.
And on the summit, the PSC chair and the PAPS Commissioner Bankole, will also present the 2024 annual report of the activities of Africa's Peace and Security Outlook to the AU Summit, which will take place, as earlier said, on the 15th and 16th of February.
Very well. So that brings us to the end of another episode. We wish Equatorial Guinea a very fruitful month as it takes the chairship of the Peace and Security Council for February 2025. And we wish everyone taking part in the work of the Peace and Security Council productive discussions on the important topics outlined briefly here today. We are happy to encourage our listeners to dig deeper into the PSC's agenda as well as the analytical work that we produce. Before we go, as usual, we'd like to wish the following African states happy National Days of celebration in February. We have the Gambia on 18th of February and Egypt on the 28th of February. Let me also thank our listeners for joining us for this month's edition of Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast. We hope you have a great month and a productive 2025. We'll be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for March 2025. Until then, goodbye. We wish you all peace and prosperity.